My parents threatened to raise my rent unless I became my sister's unpaid nanny. They didn't realize I would disappear overnight, leaving them to handle everything themselves. I'm just an ordinary 25-year-old who worked hard to finish college and land my first job as an elementary school teacher. It's not a high-paying career, but I enjoy working with kids, so it feels worthwhile. Even so, money is tight when you're starting out. That's why I've been living with my parents in the same suburban home where I grew up. It's not the most exciting arrangement, but it makes sense financially. They charge me rent, a reasonable amount, as my dad puts it, and I cover my own groceries. I also help with chores like mowing the lawn, fixing things around the house, and cleaning the garage last summer when Dad injured his back. It's not glamorous, but it's temporary. My plan was to stay for a couple of years, save money, and eventually move out. Simple enough. At least it was, until my older sister Martha came back into the picture. Martha is 32, and to put it gently, she's never been the responsible one. Growing up, she was always the golden child. I don't know if it was because she was the firstborn or because our parents simply favored her, but she could do no wrong. She dropped out of college twice, once because she wasn't inspired, and the second time because her professors were too demanding. She's never kept a job longer than a few months. Whenever something went wrong, she quit and blamed external factors. Our parents constantly stepped in to fix things. If she was late on rent, they paid it. If her car broke down, they covered the repair. If she got a speeding ticket, Mom wrote the check while complaining about unfair police treatment. Meanwhile, I was working as a diner cleaner to save for college and taking out loans for tuition. I thought Martha had been living independently for the past couple of years, but apparently she had been bouncing between apartments, always behind on rent, and relying on our parents to keep her afloat. I didn't know any of this until she showed up one day and casually announced she was pregnant. I'm not here to judge anyone's choices, but Martha wasn't exactly in a stable situation. The father was someone she had been seeing for a couple of months, and from what I gathered, he wasn't enthusiastic about the unexpected baby. He disappeared shortly after she told him. You'd think this would be Martha's wake-up call, maybe the moment she'd try to get her life on track. But no, she immediately turned to Mom and Dad, who jumped straight into problem-solving mode. Within a week, they started renovating the basement to make it into an apartment for her. They even added a kitchenette. I didn't ask where the money came from, but I overheard Mom say something about dipping into their retirement savings. I tried to stay out of it because it wasn't my place. If they wanted to spend money on Martha, that was their decision. But I could already see where things were heading. My parents always find a way to pull everyone into Martha's issues. They act like it's our collective duty to support her, no matter how many mistakes she makes. At first, I told myself it wouldn't involve me. The basement was becoming her apartment, so she'd have her own space. I figured she'd move in, live her life, and I'd continue with mine. Sure, it was frustrating to watch them go out of their way for her again, but I tried not to focus on it. That approach worked for about 2 months before small things started to add up. Mom began making comments about how I should spend more time with Martha since she was dealing with so much. This was despite the fact that I worked full-time and came home exhausted most days. Then came the guilt trips. Mom would say, "You know, Martha doesn't have anyone else right now. It's hard being pregnant and single." She'd say this while staring right at me, like I was responsible for fixing Martha's situation. Dad wasn't much different. He found ways to bring Martha into every conversation. "You should be grateful for what you have, Abby," he'd say while handing me the salt at dinner. "Not everyone is as lucky as you." Lucky? I was barely getting by, trying to build a career and save money. Meanwhile, Martha was being given a renovated apartment and constant emotional and financial support. Things escalated when I overheard Mom and Dad talking one night. They were in the living room, and I was in the kitchen making tea. "She's going to need a lot of help when the baby arrives," Mom said. "Of course," Dad replied. "We'll all pitch in." "All?" Mom asked. "Well, you, me, and Abby," Dad said, as if it were obvious. I almost dropped my mug. They hadn't mentioned anything to me about this plan, but it was clear they had already decided my role. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I didn't know the details, but I could tell they were preparing to involve me in Martha's situation, whether I agreed or not. That feeling grew when Martha began coming over more frequently. She'd sit on the couch, talking about how difficult pregnancy was and how unfair it was that her ex had left. She'd make comments about how lucky I was to have a stable job and no children. I held my tongue because I didn't want to start an argument, but I kept wondering why all of this was suddenly my responsibility. By dinner that night, I sensed something was coming. Everyone seemed too casual, like they were all in on something except me. Mom and Dad chatted about random topics, something about the neighbor's new fence, while Martha scrolled through her phone. It felt unnatural, like they were waiting for the right moment to say something. Dad made spaghetti, which is always his go-to family discussion meal for some reason, even though it doesn't make difficult conversations any easier. I tried to focus on my food rather than overthinking. But halfway through the meal, Mom cleared her throat. "So, we've been thinking," she began, looking at Dad. My stomach dropped. That phrase never leads anywhere good. "With Martha moving back home, she's going to need some help," Mom continued in a sweet tone. "Help with what exactly?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Dad answered before she could. "With the baby, of course. Martha has a lot going on, and it'll be hard for her to handle everything alone." I glanced at Martha, who was still scrolling on her phone as if the conversation didn't involve her. She didn't even look up. "Okay, but what does that have to do with me?" I asked, setting down my fork. My parents exchanged one of those looks, trying to figure out how to explain their plan. "Well," Mom said, "you're already living here and you're great with kids since you're a teacher. We thought it made sense for you to help with babysitting." "Help?" I repeated. Dad nodded. "Yeah, you know, watch the baby while Martha gets back on her feet. It wouldn't be full-time, just when you're home." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to watch a newborn after working all day?" "Well, you're usually home by 3, Mom pointed out. "And you're not paying market rent," Dad added, as if that justified everything. I stared at them, realizing they weren't asking for a small favor. They wanted me to take on a full second job without pay. "Let me get this straight," I said, leaning back. "You expect me to come home from teaching and then take care of Martha's baby?" Mom sighed like I was being unreasonable. "It's not like that, Abby. We're all going to help." "All?" I repeated. "Yes," Dad said. "We're family, and family supports each other." At that point, Martha finally looked up from her phone. "Wow, Abby," she said with a smirk. "I didn't know helping your sister was such a problem for you." I felt my hands tighten under the table. I didn't want to lose my temper, but her entitlement was difficult to ignore. "It's not that," I said. "I have my own life and my own job. I can't just take over childcare." "You're being selfish," Mom said sharply. "Martha is going through a tough time. The least you can do is help. Why is this suddenly my responsibility to fix her decisions? I said, my voice rising even though I tried to stay calm. She's 32 years old. She's not a child anymore. Martha shot me a look as if I were being unreasonable. That's enough, Dad said, his tone firm. We're all handling this together, whether you like it or not. You're living under our roof, and we expect you to contribute. Contribute? I repeated. I pay rent, buy my own groceries, and handle chores. How is that not enough? The room went silent. The tension felt heavy. Martha just sat there, looking pleased with herself, as if she'd already won. Finally, Mom spoke. Well, if you're not willing to help, we may need to reconsider your living arrangement. My stomach dropped. Are you seriously threatening to kick me out? Of course not, Mom replied quickly. But if you won't contribute more, maybe we need to raise your rent. I was stunned. I'd been doing everything I could to be responsible. And now they were pressuring me into taking on responsibilities that never belonged to me. You're really doing this? I asked, trying not to shake. You're trying to push me into becoming Martha's unpaid nanny. It's not punishment, Dad insisted. No, I said, standing up. This is about you enabling Martha, like always, and expecting me to join in. Don't talk about your sister like that, Mom snapped. I'm done, I said, heading for the stairs. If you want to help Martha, that's your decision. Leave me out of it. I went to my room and shut the door, heart pounding. I knew my parents favored Martha, but this felt extreme. It seemed less about support and more about control. They wanted me to stay under their roof so they could pressure me into doing whatever suited them. What bothered me most was Martha's attitude. She barely participated in the discussion, scrolling on her phone as though none of it involved her. And in her mind, it didn't. Mom and Dad were already doing everything for her, and now they were roping me in too? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the whole conversation replayed. By morning, I felt frustrated and trapped. I couldn't just walk out. I'd thought about it, sure, but financially, it wasn't realistic yet. I was only a few months into my teaching job and trying to save. Rent was high everywhere, and living alone wasn't affordable on my current salary. For the next few days, the house was tense. Mom and Dad were clearly unhappy with me, and they showed it through passive-aggressive remarks. Must be nice to have all that free time after work, Mom said when I came home. Some people don't get that luxury, Dad added, without looking up. I ignored them. Arguing would only make things worse. Meanwhile, Martha was practically moving in. Even without being fully settled, she treated the house like it was hers. Shoes by the couch, her purse on the dining table, shopping bags scattered around. One evening, I came home to find her watching TV, eating ice cream, completely relaxed. She barely looked at me. Hey, she muttered, before turning back to her show. I went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Half my groceries were gone. My bread, my yogurt, even my leftovers. Did you eat my food? I asked. Mom said I could, she answered, not even glancing up. She didn't pay for it, I replied sharply. Martha rolled her eyes. Relax, Abby, it's just food. It's my food, I said, raising my voice. If you want groceries, buy your own. Wow, you're being dramatic, she replied. You act like I stole your car. I stood there speechless while she started texting someone, ignoring me again. I wanted to call out her entitlement, but it wouldn't have mattered. She'd always been this way, and our parents always let it slide. The next morning, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. You need to apologize to your sister. For what? I asked, genuinely confused. For making her feel unwelcome, Mom said. She's dealing with a lot, and she doesn't need you giving her a hard time. She ate all my food, I said. How is that my fault? It's just food, Mom sighed. You can buy more. That's not the point, I said. She has no boundaries and you're enabling it. Boundaries? Mom scoffed. This is her home now too. You need to share. At that moment, I realized nothing I said would matter. Mom wasn't interested in my perspective. She just wanted compliance. Over the next week, things escalated. Mom and Dad began hinting that they would raise my rent if I didn't step up. Martha moved even more of her belongings into the basement. She even started using my bathroom because she didn't like the one downstairs. No matter how much I tried to avoid the situation, they kept pushing. One night, I came home to find Dad in the living room, holding a budget spreadsheet. "We need to talk," he said. I reluctantly sat down. "With Martha moving in, expenses will go up. We think it's only fair for you to contribute more." "You're already charging me rent," I said. "How much more do you want?" "We're still figuring that out," Dad replied. "But since you're not helping with the baby, this seems reasonable." They were openly using rent to pressure me into babysitting. "This is ridiculous," I said, standing. "If you want me to leave, just say it." "No one wants you to leave," Dad said quickly. "We just need you to do your part." "My part," I repeated, "or Martha's part?" Before he could answer, I walked upstairs and shut my door. At that point, staying wasn't sustainable. My boundaries didn't matter, and I was treated like free labor. I knew I had to leave. If I didn't, I'd be trapped indefinitely, slowly taking on more responsibilities until I became Martha's second parent. I didn't want to wake up years later, stuck and resentful. The next morning, I made coffee and sat down with my laptop. I reviewed my budget. Rent, groceries, gas, student loans. I'd saved enough to move if I tightened my spending for a while. Then I remembered my coworker Alicia mentioning she needed a roommate. At the time, I brushed it off, but now it felt like the perfect opportunity. I texted her, "Hey, is that roommate thing still available?" She responded right away, "Yep, you interested?" "Maybe. Can we talk after work?" "Of course." After school, when the halls were quiet, I went to her classroom. She was grading papers. "What's going on?" she asked. "I'm thinking about moving out," I said. "Things at home are getting complicated." She nodded knowingly. "The offer's still open. It's not huge, but it's clean. We split everything evenly. Rent is $800, utilities included." It was higher than I'd hoped, but manageable. "When would you need someone?" I asked. "Yesterday," she joked. "But any time works. If you want it, the room's yours." I told her I'd confirm by the end of the week, but honestly, I already knew what I was going to do. This was my way out. I just needed to leave without creating more problems. If my parents found out too early, I knew they would try to interfere. They would guilt-trip me, argue, or even raise my rent on the spot to make it harder for me to save. So I stayed quiet. I began packing gradually. Only essentials, clothing, personal items, and anything I couldn't easily replace. I stored everything in the trunk of my car, tucked under a blanket so no one would question it. At the same time, I started documenting everything. I took photos of my room, furniture, electronics, and anything that might later be disputed. From experience, I knew Martha tended to forget what belonged to whom, and I wasn't willing to lose my belongings during the process of moving out. One night, after everyone was asleep, I printed a letter giving my 30-day notice. I'd looked up the guidelines online and learned that even if I wasn't a formal tenant, putting things in writing was a smart precaution. The last thing I wanted was an accusation that I left without warning. I barely slept that night, checking the clock and listening for anyone waking up. At 6 a.m., I slid the envelope under my parents' bedroom door. The reaction came quickly. When I got home from work, both of them were waiting in the living room. "What's this?" Dad asked, holding the letter like it was an insult. "It's my notice," I said steadily. "You're really going through with this?" Mom asked, already emotional. "Yes, I found a place, and I'll be moving out by the end of the month." "You can't just leave," Mom insisted. "What about Martha? What about the baby?" I took a breath. "Martha and the baby aren't my responsibility. I've helped as much as I can, but I can't keep living like this." "What's wrong with you?" Dad said. "You weren't this stubborn before. We've given you so much, letting you stay here, helping you get started, and this is how you thank us?" I held back my frustration. "I pay rent," I said calmly. "I buy my own groceries. I'd supported myself since graduating. I'm not a child, and I'm not a replacement caretaker for Martha." Mom started crying, something she often did when things didn't go her way. "How could you do this to us? To your sister?" I stayed quiet. There was nothing productive left to say. The next few days were extremely uncomfortable. My parents barely spoke to me, unless it was to make passive comments meant to guilt me. Martha acted like everything was normal and continued spreading her belongings around the house. One evening, I came home and found she had moved even more items into the basement. Boxes stacked everywhere and clothes stuffed into the closet. "Hope you don't mind," she said. I didn't answer. I just went to my room and closed the door, trying to ignore the frustration building inside me. During the last days before my move, I finalized everything, packed the remaining essentials, reviewed my budget again, and coordinated with Alicia to pick up the keys. Everything was coming together, but I still felt uneasy. The morning of my move was the hardest. Alicia was supposed to arrive early so we could pack my last items before anyone noticed. I hoped Martha would still be asleep and my parents would be busy with their routine. But things rarely go that smoothly for my family. I was halfway through carrying boxes outside when I heard my dad's footsteps. He appeared at the top of the stairs. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "I told you, I'm leaving today," I said, continuing toward the door. "You can't sneak out like this," he snapped, following me outside. "We're a family. Are you abandoning us?" I set the box in my trunk and turned around. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm choosing to live my own life." Before he could respond, Mom came to the doorway, already crying. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," I repeated. "What about Martha? What about the baby?" she cried. "Mom, I've told you many times. Martha's choices aren't my responsibility. I can't keep putting my life on hold to clean up her mistakes." That triggered another reaction. "How dare you talk about your sister like that?" she said. "She's doing her best." "Is she?" I replied, because it seems like she expects everyone else to manage things for her. Right then, Martha walked out of the basement, clearly awake. She glanced at the situation and smirked. "Don't worry, Mom. If Abby wants to be selfish, let her. We don't need her." I ignored the comment and turned to Alicia, who had just arrived. "Let's get this done." My parents kept voicing their frustrations, while Alicia helped me load the last boxes. "Who's going to help us now?" Dad shouted. "How can you be so heartless?" Mom added. Martha simply watched from the doorway. When we finished loading everything, I took one last look at the house. Instead of sadness, I felt relief. I started the engine, and Alicia followed behind me. Arriving at her apartment complex felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't extravagant, but it was clean, peaceful, and free from my family's constant tension. Within an hour, everything was unpacked. We sat afterward and talked about work. For the first time in a long time, things felt normal. That feeling lasted about 2 hours. My phone started buzzing. Calls, texts, voicemails from relatives. My mom had already told the whole family that I'd abandoned them. Everyone had an opinion. "Abby, how could you do this to your sister?" one voicemail said. "She's pregnant and needs support," another message claimed. "You're selfish," a cousin wrote. Then there were Martha's posts online. Pictures of her baby bump with captions like, "Some people would rather walk away than help their own family." I blocked her immediately. I reminded myself this was exactly why I left, to escape the pressure and manipulation that constantly surrounded my family. Things escalated again at work the following week. My mom showed up during lunch, crying and asking to talk. She claimed the family was falling apart without me. My principal eventually had to ask her to leave, which was embarrassing, but it also made me realize how out of control things had become. 2 weeks later, I discovered I'd left important documents behind: teaching certificates, tax forms, and other papers. I had overlooked them during the rush to leave. After everything that happened at school, I told a couple of coworkers about the situation. They immediately offered help. "Just tell us when," Alicia said. A few days later, she and another coworker, Maria, came with me to pick up the remaining items. I thought I was prepared, but I underestimated how far my family would go. My room was unrecognizable. Martha had moved in more of her belongings, mixing them with mine. Clothes that weren't mine filled the dresser. Baby supplies covered the desk, and my nightstand had been emptied. "What's going on?" I said quietly. Martha appeared, holding coffee. "Oh, some of my stuff must have mixed in. Hard to tell what's what now." "You mean the belongings in my room? The room I lived in for years?" She shrugged. "You already left, so why does it matter?" She had clearly planned this, but I was ready. I opened my phone and pulled up the folder of photos documenting everything. "I already have pictures and lists of all my items," I said, showing her. She looked annoyed, but before she could respond, my parents walked in. "What's happening?" Dad demanded. "What are you taking?" "I'm collecting the items I left behind," I said. "I have proof of everything." Dad's expression hardened. "If you take anything that isn't yours, I'll call the police." I gave a short, dry laugh. "You can, and we can also discuss you going into my room without permission." He didn't respond. Alicia and Maria helped me sort through everything. Martha tried to claim my laptop, but I showed the receipt and serial number. The more she realized her plan wouldn't work, the more upset she became. "This is unfair," she said loudly. "You're taking advantage of a pregnant woman." "The only one trying to take anything here is you," I replied. "And I'm done being treated like your unpaid help." When everything was sorted, I left with Alicia and didn't look back. That was 6 months ago. Martha has since had the baby, and everything is going exactly how I expected. My parents are now responsible for full-time childcare while also managing their jobs. They're exhausted. Martha hasn't tried to find work, saying she's too stressed. She spends most of her time on her phone, ignoring responsibilities. The unfinished basement renovation is draining my parents' savings. They've tried contacting me repeatedly, first accusing me of being ungrateful, then guilt-tripping me about the baby, and now sending photos of my niece with captions asking me to be involved. I've blocked everything. A few relatives keep me updated, but I've made it clear I won't reconnect until my parents and Martha take accountability and make real changes. Ironically, if they had respected my boundaries and asked for normal, occasional help, I might have agreed. I enjoy being around kids. But when they tried to force me into full-time childcare and disregarded my space, they made that impossible. If I learned anything, it's that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for your family is stop enabling behavior that keeps everyone stuck.